A lot of project decisions make perfect sense once you stop looking at them as construction decisions. They make sense as capital decisions, they make sense as risk decisions, they make sense as margin decisions, they make sense as reporting decisions. And that is probably why the subject is difficult to talk about properly. Because if you look at construction today and say, finance broke it, that can sound too easy, too emotional, too much like blame. And I don't think that is quite right. Finance did not walk into construction one day and destroy it. It did something much quieter and subtle. It changed what the system rewarded. And once that changes, everything downstream starts adapting. Slowly at first, then structurally, and then eventually culturally. People make projects that bring profits, but profits decide which projects get built and what people become. This is Bytnar Talks. People, projects, profits. I'm Piotr Bytnar, founder of Bytnar Limited, a chartered structural engineering practice founded in 2017. At Bytnar, we work around the point where technical reality, project delivery, capital pressure and organizational decision making meet. And that is an interesting place to sit, because very often the visible issue on a project is not the first issue. The visible issue might be a delay, a coordination failure, a quality problem, a contractor under pressure, a consultant who seems stretched, a client who wants certainty that nobody can honestly give yet. But beneath that, there is usually something else. A structure, an incentive, a decision that made sense at the time, a piece of risk moved from one place to another, a bit of capability consumed without being rebuilt. And by the time it shows up on site, everyone is already dealing with the consequence, not the cause. So in this episode, I want to talk about how finance quietly broke construction, but not in the simple way, not as a rant, not as a finance bad, construction good type of the rant. That would be too shallow, because finance also enabled scale. Finance enabled infrastructure. Finance enabled development. Finance brought discipline into places that needed discipline. It created capital access, better reporting, stronger governance, sharper cost control, and in many cases, more professional management. So the visible explanation is not wrong at all. It's just incomplete. And that incompleteness matters, because some of the decisions that weakened construction were not reckless decisions. They were praised decisions. They improved margins. They strengthened balance sheets. They reduced waste. They made businesses look better managed. They were completely rational inside the financial frame. The problem is that construction does not only run on money. It runs on competence. It runs on judgment. It runs on coordination. It runs on apprenticeships. It runs on people who have seen enough go wrong to recognize risk before it has name. And those things do not appear properly on a spreadsheet. They are expensive when viewed quarterly, but essential when viewed generationally. That is where the break happened. Not in one moment, not in one bad policy, not because one group of people became greedy, but because the industry was gradually re-optimized around financial efficiency, while the technical and operational capacity that made delivery possible was slowly consumed. And for a long time, nothing looked broken. It never does. And this type of conversation can be heard throughout the businesses, economic and political worlds, not only construction, engineering or architecture. The immediate consequence of financially driven decisions are never apparent for the people who make them in their ivory towers. That is the problem. Let's start with the part people often miss. Construction was never an easy sector financially, never. Margins are thin, risk is high, coordination is difficult, cash flow is uncomfortable. Projects are local, physical, weather exposed, labor dependent, and full of uncertainty. You cannot scale a building in the same way you scale software. You cannot remove all variability from ground conditions, supply chains, planning constraints, interfaces between them, existing structures, human behavior, and client decision making. So when financial logic entered more strongly, it did not arrive into a perfectly efficient industry. It arrived into a messy one. And some of that mess was real. There was waste. There was inefficient processes. There were weak controls. There were comfortable habits. There were organizations carrying overhead without always understanding whether that overhead was productive. So when finance began tightening things, some of the early results were genuinely positive. Waste reduction, reporting improvement, procurement became more disciplined, cost overruns were scrutinized, boards gained better visibility, investors gained more confidence, projects became easier to package, fund, monitor, and defend. And from a commercial point of view, this looked like progress, because in many ways, it was. That is important. If we pretend everything was healthy before financial discipline arrived, we lose the thread. The real issue is more uncomfortable. The issue is that the same tools that remove waste can eventually remove resilience. And the difference is not always visible at the moment the decision is made. Slack looks like waste until you need it. Senior technical people look expensive until the thing they would have prevented happens. Training looks discretionary until there is nobody left to carry judgment forward. Contingency looks inefficient until uncertainty arrives. And uncertainty always arrives. That is construction. At Bytnar, this is one of the things we look at quite carefully at. Not just whether something works on paper, but whether the system has enough capability to absorb what happens when paper meets reality. Because that is usually where projects begin to reveal the truth. The contract might look clear, the risk allocation might look clean, the program might look logical, the reporting might look controlled, but once the project starts moving, the question becomes different. Can the organization actually coordinate complexity under pressure? Can the technical decision survive commercial compression? Can the people responsible for delivery still raise concerns early enough? Can the system protect judgment, or does it only protect liability? That distinction matters. You see, the construction does not fail only when people make mistakes. It fails when the environment no longer has enough capacity to catch mistakes before they compound. And financial optimization often reduces exactly that catching capacity. Not because it wants to create failure, not intentionally, really. Catching capacity is hard to price. It sits in experience, in relationships, in technical memory, in people knowing who to phone before something becomes formal. In something saying, hold on, that detail doesn't feel right. Or perhaps, we've seen this before. Or that program looks achievable, but only 5 things go perfectly together. That kind of intelligence is not always documented, but it is very real. And once you remove too much of it, the project may still function, but it becomes thinner, less forgiving, more dependent on everything going to plan. And projects rarely reward systems that need everything to go to plan. There is a phrase we use a lot in business without always understanding its consequence. And the phrase is efficiency. It sounds positive. and often it is. No one wants waste. No one wants bloated organizations. No one wants unnecessary costs sitting inside delivery systems. But efficiency in a stable system and efficiency in a complex systems are not always the same thing. In a stable system, efficiency can be beautiful. You remove unnecessary movement, you simplify process, you reduce duplication, you improve flow, but construction is not a stable system. It's not Amazon. It's construction. Construction is a coordination environment under uncertainty. And in that kind of environment, some of what looks inefficient is actually protective. The extra conversation, I think, the senior engineer reviewing something that technically has already been checked is the thing. The experienced supervisor walking the site and noticing what the drawings do not show. It is like an early warning, isn't it? The time allowed for proper design development before procurement locks the project into assumptions as another one. The space for young professionals to learn beside people who have carried consequences before. The contingency that nobody wants to spend, but everyone quietly depends on. From a financial perspective, these things can look like fat. From a delivery perspective, they may be muscle. And that is where the horse analogy becomes useful. That's the analogy I like to show to people how you can perceive a good trimming financially that leads to the very bad consequences. Like imagine a strong workhorse, right? Muscly, big, strong, resilient. For years it's been properly fed, properly trained and worked steadily. It carries heavy loads because strength has been built over time. Then a new owner arrives and studies the books. The horse eats a lot, so the feed is reduced slightly. The horse still performs. Then the feed is reduced again. Well, it still performs. The schedule tightens. Well, it still performs. The numbers improve. Lower cost, higher output, better efficiency. From the outside, it looks like management has improved the farm. But what is really happening is that the horse is living off stored strength. Muscle does not disappear overnight. It thins gradually, and for a long time the work continues, until one day, under a load that used to be routine, the horse falters. Not because of one bad decision, because strength was consumed faster than it was rebuilt. This is not the problem of the straw that broke the camel's back. It is a problem of cutting the camel's feed. That, I think, is one of the most accurate ways to understand what happened in construction. The industry did not collapse, it was optimized. Buffers were removed, margins were tightened, headcounts were trimmed, training was scrutinized, senior technical layers thinned, management improved, reporting strengthened, and for a generation it worked. Projects were still delivered, returns improved, balance sheets strengthened, because the industry was still running on capacity built in earlier decades. Deep technical benches, long apprenticeships, embedded professional authority, institutional memory. People who had seen building sites, failures, disputes, repairs, redesigns, collapses of coordination, and the quiet signs that appear before something serious happens. That stored competence carried the system for longer than people realized. And this is where financial time and construction time start to separate. Financial decisions can show result in a quarter. Technical capacity erodes over decades. You can reduce training this year and see no immediate consequence. You can remove a senior role and still deliver the next project. You can compress a program and get away with it. You can push risk down the supply chain and see margin improve. You can treat expertise as overhead and nothing breaks immediately. That delay is dangerous because the absence of immediate failure becomes evidence that the decision was sound. The system says it works, but it may only be working because reserves still exist, and reserves are not infinite. This is why I often come back to capability, not just capacity. Capacity is how much activity the system can carry. More people, more projects, more workload, more output. Capability is different. Capability is whether the system can make good decisions under pressure, whether it can coordinate across complexity, whether it can absorb uncertainty without becoming defensive, whether it can protect technical judgment when commercial pressure rises. Most organizations can increase capacity faster than capability, and that gap is where fragility forms. The industry has become very good at increasing activity, less good at replenishing the capability that makes that activity safe, coherent, and resilient. That is not a small issue. That is the issue. Now, there is another shift that matters. Profit moved. Not all of it, obviously, but structurally, over time, more value began to be captured upstream. Financial structuring, capital aggregation, risk packaging, asset management, portfolio control, the physical act of building still happened, designers still designed, engineers still calculated, contractors still built. Trades still turn up in weather, mud, tight sites, awkward sequences, late information and incomplete decisions. But the economic center of gravity began moving. The highest return activity was increasingly not construction itself. It was financing construction. And again, this is not a moral statement. It is a structural one. Engineering creates physical value. Financial engineering creates scalable returns. And scalable returns attract capital. So the system adapts. Balance sheet strength becomes more decisive than technical depth. Access to capital becomes more important than mastery of delivery. Risk structuring becomes more profitable than risk resolution. The buildings still stand. Projects still complete. But the system's attention moved upwards. And when profit moves upstream, pressure moves downstream. The line is worth sitting with. When profit moves upstream, pressure moves downstream. You see it in margins, you see it in procurement, you see it in risk allocation, you see it in subcontractor behavior, you see it in how quickly everyone becomes careful with language once the project starts tightening. The top layer wants certainty, the delivery layer lives inside uncertainty. And the more certainty is promised upstream, the more pressure appears downstream to make reality fit the promise. That is where a lot of project behavior starts to make sense. Why people become defensive, why early warnings get softened, why programs become political documents, why contingency become uncomfortable, why design development gets treated as delay, why technical caution is sometimes interpreted as commercial obstruction, why suppliers price risk they cannot fully control, why site teams absorb decisions made months earlier by people who are no longer in the room. At Bytnar, we end up paying attention to where pressure enters the delivery chain, not just where it is visible. Because by the time pressure reaches site, it has usually passed through several layers already. Capital expectations, funding deadlines, procurement strategy, contractual risk allocation, design compression, budget assumptions, reporting commitments, board confidence, client promises, and then eventually someone on the ground is expected to make it all physically true. That is a lot to place onto delivery. And often, the people closest to the work are not the people who created the assumptions. They are just the first people who can no longer hide from them. This is why it is too easy to say construction has a productivity problem, or a skills problem, or a quality problem. Those things may be real, but they are symptoms. The deeper question is, what kind of system keeps producing those symptoms? Because if the value capture sits above the act of building, and the delivery layer is treated mainly as a cost center, then the system will do what systems do. It will squeeze the cost center. It will standardize it. It will outsource it. It will transfer risk into it. It will ask it to be leaner, faster, more predictable, more reportable, and more contractually contained. And for a while, the delivery layer will absorb that, because people are competent, because pride exists, because nobody wants to be the one who says the assumptions do not work, because professionals in construction are very good at making difficult things happen anyway. That is part of the problem. The industry's competence masks the damage being done to the conditions that produce that competence. People kept carrying the system, so the system assumed it was fine. And would you think it could be otherwise? Ask yourself this question. If someone told you things are not realistic and someone else told you nothing or just took it as is, who will you choose for the project? Perhaps you could choose the first one, the person who picks up on the issue, but then you would need to have the capability to understand it and appreciate it too. Otherwise, how can you judge? You cannot. And now ask yourself if the management has this capability and how deep is it? That is what I thought. Probably not that much at all. There is a meeting dynamic that shows this quite clearly. You can usually feel it when a project has started living under financial pressure. The room may still sound professional, the agenda still moves, the minutes still get written, actions still get allocated, but the language changes. People stop saying what they think, they start saying what can be defended. The contractor does not say, this program is unrealistic. They say, there are concerns around sequencing that may affect delivery. The consultant does not say, this design has not matured enough for procurement. They say, further coordination may be required. The client does not say, we need this to stay fundable. They say, we need greater certainty around cost and program. Everyone is communicating, but not everything is being said. That is a pressure signal, and it appears long before formal failure. This is where the episode shifts slightly, because finance does not only change spreadsheets, it changes psychology, it changes how people speak, it changes what people are willing to admit, it changes how early risk is surfaced, it changes whether bad news travels upward cleanly or gets softened at each layer. And once bad news is softened enough, leadership can still believe the project is under control, while the delivery environment already knows it is becoming fragile. The gap is one of the most dangerous gaps in construction. The gap between reported control and operational confidence. At Bytnar, when we are around projects, that is one of the things we quietly read. Not just the report, the confidence underneath the report. Are people speaking clearly? Are they still raising issues early? Are technical concerns being treated as intelligence or inconvenience? Are people solving the actual problem or managing the appearance of control? Because those are different environments. Very different. A project can look mature because it has governance, but governance is not the same as judgment. A project can look controlled because it has reporting, but guess what? Reporting is not the same as visibility. A project can look disciplined because risk is allocated, but allocation is not the same as resolution. And this distinction become blurred as management replaced mastery. That phrase may sound strong. Management replaced mastery. I know, it's a little bit controversial. It's a little bit going head to head with the management industry, but I do not mean management is bad. Good management matters. Governance matters and processes matters. Documentation matters too, as does the financial control. The issue is what happens when those things become substitutes for embedded technical authority rather than supports for it. Because as capital exposure grows, organizations naturally demand more visibility. more reporting, more approvals, more dashboards, more escalation pathways, more defensibility. This is rational. If more money is at risk, more control is demanded. But control structures can only do certain things. They can track risk, they can record decisions, they can allocate responsibility, they can create evidence, they can make exposure visible. What they cannot do is replace the experienced engineer who senses that the design logic is wrong. They cannot replace the project lead who knows a procurement route will create coordination gaps later. They cannot replace the site manager who knows that a sequence looks fine in a meeting but will fall apart in real weather with real trades on a real site. They cannot replace mentorship. They cannot replace craft. They cannot replace judgment built through repeated exposure to consequences. Management is scalable. Mastery is slow. And modern systems tend to reward what scales. You can replicate a process, you cannot replicate 30 years of technical instinct quickly. So over time, the industry becomes better managed and technically thinner. That is a dangerous combination, because it creates the feeling of maturity without always retaining the substance underneath. The bridge is no longer defended primarily by the most experienced person in the room. It is defended by the process. And sometimes the process is necessary. But sometimes the process is just a record of how the risk moved through the system before it became unavoidable. This is why some projects feel heavily supervised but not truly protected. Lots of meetings, lots of controls. Yeah, we've seen all of that really, didn't we? Lots of dashboards, lots of signatures, constant toes and fro's. It never ends. But still underneath, the people closest to the work do not feel fully confident. And when that happens, the issue is rarely one missing document. It is usually a capability issue. The system can administrate the project, but can it defend the outcome? That is a very different question. There is another uncomfortable part of this, I think. Many of the decisions that weakened construction were good decisions locally. When you're in silo, you just see what you see. You don't see all of the other pieces in the puzzle. That is what makes the problem hard. A CEO takes over a mature engineering firm, let's say, just to give you a bit of the story how that could unfold. You see, he sees margins are modest, overheads feel heavy, senior people sit between projects, training budgets are substantial, the business is good but not especially profitable, so adjustments are made. Underutilized senior roles are reduced, training is tightened, procurement is centralized, risk is pushed further down the supply chain, contingency is scrutinized. Within 3 years, profit improves, cash flow strengthens, return on capital rises, the firm looks more disciplined, and the numbers validate the decision. Nothing collapses, clients are still served, projects still move, so the strategy is considered successful. Yes! And from the perspective of that leadership team, it may have been successful. That is the difficulty, to see the full picture. The damage does not appear on the timeline. Technical capacity does not erode on quarterly timelines. It erodes on generational timelines. Mentorship thins slowly. Judgment gaps appear gradually. Institutional memory disappears one retirement at a time. Professional authority weakens through 100 small substitutions. It's like a death by 100 small cuts. Technical confidence gets replaced by process confidence. And by the time the consequences become visible, the original decision maker or makers are often gone. The market has changed, the leadership has changed, the firm has restructured, the problem receives, guess what? A new label. Like, skills shortage, productivity issue, quality drift, coordination failure, oversight weakness. Have you heard that before? And some of those labels are true, in a sense. But again, they are incomplete. Because what looks like a skill shortage today may partially be the delayed effect of decisions that made financial sense 20 years ago. What looks like poor coordination today may partially be the result of fragmented responsibility to manage risk. What looks like weak oversight today may partially be the effect of replacing embedded technical authority with administrative supervision. What looks like low productivity today may partially be the consequence of asking the delivery layer to absorb complexity that was created upstream. This is where Bytnar position becomes very practical, because you cannot fix these problems only at the surface. You can recruit more people and still not rebuild capability. You can improve reporting and still not improve judgment. You can add governance and still not restore technical authority. You can write tighter scopes and still not create alignment. You can push harder on delivery and still not solve the system that keeps producing avoidable pressure. The work has to go deeper into how organizations understand risk, how they hold technical knowledge, how they coordinate across fragmented teams, how they make decisions under uncertainty, how they recognize early signs of drift, how they protect capability before pressure exposes the lack of it. That is the real work. Not dramatic, not always visible, but essential. Because if construction has been weakened by decades of optimizing away resilience, then rebuilding resilience is not a motivational exercise. It is operational design. It is organizational design. It is capability building. It is changing what the system can actually carry. There is a generational illusion sitting underneath all of this. The industry inherited strength, and for a long time it mistook inherited strength for current health. In another way, think about the family business built by a master craftsman. The first generation spends 40 years building reputation, knowledge, client trust, habits, apprenticeships, technical depth, and professional authority. The second generation inherits the business. They modernize it, they improve the reporting, they tighten cost control, they standardize processes, they increase margins. The business grows faster than ever. From the outside, it looks like superior management. And partially it is. But the second generation is not necessarily building the same depth of capability that the first generation built. It may be operating on accumulated reserves, accumulated trust, accumulated judgment, accumulated relationships, accumulated technical memory. For a while, performance remains strong until the original masters retire. Then something shifts. The system remains, the dashboards remain, the brand remains, the client list remains, but the underlying capability has thinned. Construction has lived through something similar. Generational active through the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s built deep technical capacity. Long apprenticeships, embedded engineers, resident architects, clerks of works, experienced foremen, senior people who knew the craft, the risk, the politics, the buildings, and the site reality. Then, as financial optimization accelerated, delivery did not immediately collapse. Because those peoples were still there. You could reduce training because the workforce was already trained. You could thin senior layer because experienced mentors still existed. You could compress programs because teams had enough instinct to compensate. You could shift risk because the supply chain still had enough competence to absorb it. The system looked efficient, but it was partly spending capacity accumulated before the optimization began. This is the two-generational illusion. Optimization feels sustainable while you are spending someone else's accumulated strength. And that is where a lot of modern construction sits now. Not empty of capability, that would be unfair. There are still excellent people, very capable people, very committed people, people carrying enormous complexity under very difficult conditions. But the system around them is thinner, less forgiving, less patient, less able to provide the learning space, coordination structure, and technical authority that develops the next generation properly. And that creates a strange emotional atmosphere in projects. People are working hard, very hard indeed, but there is often a sense that the system is asking more than it has equipped them to carry. You can feel that in design teams, you can feel it in contractors, you can feel it in clients. You can feel it when everyone is busy, everyone is reporting, everyone is attending meetings, everyone is trying to keep things moving. And yet, the project does not feel properly led or held. That is a very specific feeling. Experienced people recognize it immediately. It is not panic, it is not failure, it is a quiet thing of confidence. The sense that the project is still moving, but the margin for recovery is disappearing. This is where we often need to slow down. Because a lot of organizations respond to that feeling by adding more activity. More meetings, more trackers, more updates, more deadlines, more reporting, more pressure. But if the real issue is capability, more activity can make the problem worse. It can consume the remaining capacity. It can return people defensive. It can turn people defensive. It can make communication shorter. It can cause everyone to solve today while nobody has enough space to think about tomorrow. At Bytnar, this is why clarity matters so much. Not cosmetic clarity, real clarity. What is the actual problem? Come on. Where was the pressure created? Who has authority to change the condition? What risk is being carried silently? What capability is missing? What assumptions are no longer holding? Where is the project administrating reality instead of confronting it? Those are not always comfortable questions, are they? But they are useful. And in difficult environments, useful matters more than comfortable. One of the most damaging ideas in modern construction is that risk can simply be transferred. It can be allocated, it can be priced, it can be documented, it can be insured, it can be moved contractually. But it does not disappear, you see. The risk is physical eventuality, or is physical eventually. It shows up in design decisions, it shows up in sequencing, in coordination, in temporary works, in procurement lead times, it shows up in a detail that does not quite work, it shows up in a trade interface nobody fully owns. It shows up when the program assumes certainty that the project does not actually have. Financial systems like risk transfer because it creates apparent control. It protects the top layer. It creates definable exposure. It allows capital to proceed. And again, that is rational, isn't it? But operationally, risk transfer often becomes risk movement. And if the party receiving the risk does not have the margin, information, authority, or capability to manage it, the risk does not become managed. It becomes hidden. That is where projects become fragile, not because the risk register is empty, but because the risk has moved into behavior. People stop surfacing problems early because they know what the commercial consequence might be. Suppliers protect themselves. Consultants narrow their scope. Contractors price defensively where they can and absorb quietly where they cannot. Clients ask for certainty because funding demands it, and everyone becomes more careful. Not necessarily dishonest, but careful. That distinction matters. Most project environments do not become dysfunctional because people suddenly became bad actors. They become dysfunctional because the incentive structure teaches everyone what it's safe to say. You can sit in a meeting where everyone is technically communicating and still leave with less truth than project needs. That is one of the ways finance quietly changes construction. Not directly, but through the conditions it creates around risk, certainty, and defensibility. This is where technical leadership matters. Because technical leadership is not only about calculations or drawings or compliance. It is about protecting reality inside the project conversation. It is about saying what is true early enough for the system to respond. It is about translating uncertainty into decisions people can actually make. It is about recognizing where commercial logic is starting to distort technical judgment. It is about keeping the project connected to this physical consequence. At Bytnar, this is very much the space we care about. This is the space I care about, personally. Because construction needs finance. We all know that. It needs capital. It needs commercial discipline. But it also needs people and systems capable of saying, hold on, this is the reality of what you are asking the project to carry. Not dramatically, not defensively, just clearly. And if that clarity is missing, projects start drifting. They may still look controlled, but they start drifting. The phrase finance quietly broke construction can sound like finance acted from outside. But in reality, finance became part of construction's operating system. That is different. It did not just fund projects, it began shaping what counted as success. Return on capital, margin improvement, risk insulation, reporting certainty, portfolio scalability. This became powerful selection pressures, and systems evolve around what selection rewards. If you reward balance sheet strength, organization will optimize for balance sheet strength. If you reward risk transfer, organization will become good at transferring risk. If you reward short-term margin improvement, leadership will find ways to improve short-term margins. If you reward reporting certainty, teams will become skilled at producing certainty even where reality is uncertain. If you reward process compliance more visibly than technical judgment, process compliance will grow stronger. This is not greed, it is selection. Natural selection. Go back to the Darwin guy. Similar stuff. And selection changes the people who rise. It changes the language of leadership. It changes the structure of organizations. It changes what gets funded internally. It changes what is protected during downturns. It changes what is considered overhead. It changes what is considered strategic. Over time, organizations become financially stronger, managerially tighter, operationally leaner, and technically thinner. Again, not everywhere, not in every firm, not in every project, but structurally across the industry, that is the direction. You can see the outcome in the way expertise is sometimes treated. Deep technical capability is admired in principle, but difficult to justify when not fully utilized. Mentorship is valued culturally, but vulnerable financially. Professional judgment is respected rhetorically, but often subordinated structurally. Training is prized publicly, but cut quietly when margins tighten. And experienced people are celebrated once they have already become scarce. That's how capability erosion works. Not through rejection, through underinvestment, through delay, through substitution, through assuming that because competence exists today, it will still exist tomorrow. It won't. At Bytnar, this is why we do not treat capability as a soft idea. Capability is infrastructure. It is as real as bridge, a road, a foundation, a drainage system. You may not see it directly, but everything depends on it. And when capability is weak, projects become expensive in strange ways. Not always through obvious failure, sometimes through repeated work, slow decisions, unclear ownership, late coordination, defensive behavior, escalation fatigue, overloaded senior people, junior people left without enough guidance, consultants working in fragments, contractors absorbing ambiguity, clients receiving reports that are technically accurate but operationally incomplete. Those costs are real. They just do not always sit neatly in the line item where they were created. And that is part of the issue. Financial systems are very good at seeing certain kinds of costs. They are less good at seeing the cost of weakened judgment before it becomes failure. By then, it's always more expensive. I mean, always. There is a strange contradiction in construction now. We have more process than ever. More technology, more dashboards, more controls, more contractual sophistication, more reporting, more risk management language, and yet many people inside the industry feel that delivery has become harder, not easier. That contradiction tells us something. It suggests that the problem is not simply a lack of tools. It may be a loss of coherence. Because tools do not create coherence by themselves. Processes do not create alignment by themselves. Contractors do not create trust by themselves. Reporting does not create capability by itself. They help when the underlying system is healthy. They can even strengthen it. But when the underlying system is fragmented, tools can become a way of managing fragmentation rather than resolving it. More documentation, more approvals, more interfaces, more specialists, more handovers, more caveats, more evidence, more protection, but not necessarily more shared understanding. And construction needs shared understanding. Not perfect agreement, let's be honest. That is unrealistic. But enough alignment for people to understand what problem they are solving, what risk they are carrying, what decisions matter, and where reality is moving away from assumption. When finance becomes the dominant lens, shared understanding can weaken because each party begins optimizing its own exposure. The client protects funding, the funder protects return, the developer protects viability, the consultant protects scope, the contractor protects margin, the subcontractor protects survival, the insurer protects policy, the lawyer protects position. Everyone is behaving rationally, but not necessarily collectively. And projects are collective acts. That is the tension. Construction is delivered through interdependence inside systems that increasingly reward self-protection. That is a difficult environment. And it explains why so many projects feel full of activity but light on genuine coordination. Everyone is doing their job, but the project still does not quite hold together. This is one of the reasons I keep coming back to people, projects, profits. Because those three things are never separate. People make projects. Projects produce profits. Profits shape which behaviors are rewarded. And those rewarded behaviors shape people again. It loops. That is the important part. If profit rewards technical depth, people develop technical depth. If profit rewards risk movement, people learn risk movement. If profit rewards reporting certainty, people learn to present certainty. If profit rewards speed over understanding, people learn to move before they fully understand. Not because people are weak, because people adapt. Systems teach behavior. And over time, behavior becomes culture. That is why try harder is not enough. The industry is full of people trying hard. It has been trying hard for years. The issue is not effort. The issue is whether the system rewards the behaviors that rebuild capability. At the moment, too often, it does not. So what does rebuilding look like? Not romantically, not as a return to some imagined perfect past. The past had problems too. Construction has always been difficult. But rebuilding means recognizing that technical capability is not an optional layer sitting beneath financial performance. It is one of the foundations of financial performance, long term. If you weaken capability, you may improve returns for a while, but eventually the costs return through disputes, rework, delay, quality failures, insurance pressure, safety issues, reputational damage, loss of trust, overloaded supply chains, exhausted professionals, and a general sense that projects have become harder to deliver than they should be. The cost comes back, just later, and often to someone else. Rebuilding means giving technical judgment structural authority again, not just symbolic respect, actual authority. It means designing procurement routes that do not create coordination failure and then blame the delivery teams for struggling. It means treating training and mentorship as capacity building investments, not discretionary overheads. It means retaining enough senior expertise to protect projects before issues become visible. It means allowing contingency to be understood as resilience, not weakness. It means asking whether risk has been genuinely managed or simply moved. It means clients understanding that the cheapest route to certainty is often early clarity, not late pressure. It means contractors begin being unable to contribute buildability knowledge before the project becomes commercially locked. It means consultants being allowed enough scope and time to coordinate properly. It means finance understanding that physical delivery has its own logic, and that logic cannot be fully compressed into the rhythm of capital reporting. This is not anti-finance. This is more serious than that. It is about mature finance. Finance that understands the asset is not only the completed building, the asset is also the capability system that makes delivery possible. And if that system is depleted, future projects become more fragile. It almost sounds like our economy, doesn't it? At Bytnar, this is where our thinking often sits. Between investment intention and delivery reality, between contractor pressure and client expectation, between technical consequence and commercial decision making. Because if those worlds do not understand each other, the project becomes the place where the misunderstanding turns physical. And construction is not kind to misunderstandings. It eventually exposes them through time, through costs, through quality, through relationships, through risk, through buildings that are harder to operate, maintain, adapt, or trust, or through buildings that fail. Fail the people that buy and live in them, and fail the companies and wider society. It seems to be the case now. Wherever you read a newspaper talking about failures in higher-rise buildings, and this one's the most financially driven, you see plenty of problems, whether that's cladding, drainage, ventilation, or whatnot. Plenty of problems there. The aim should not be to remove finance from construction, though. It's impossible. We live in a financial system, don't we? That is impossible and undesirable. The aim should be to stop allowing financial optimization to consume the very capability it depends on. That is the difference. Finance should enable construction, not hollow it out. There's also a human cost here that we do not always name. When systems become thin, people become the buffer. The missing coordination becomes someone's evening. The unrealistic program becomes someone's weekend. The underdeveloped design becomes someone's side problem. The transferred risk becomes someone's margin. The lack of mentorship becomes someone's anxiety. The weakened technical authority becomes someone's difficult conversation. The insufficient contingency becomes someone's pressure. And because construction professionals are often proud, capable, and used to difficulty, they absorb a lot before they say anything. That absorption keeps projects moving, but it also hides systems' weakness. You see it in the small signs. People become harder to reach, meetings become more cautious, emails become longer but less clear, actions multiply, decisions slow down, senior people become bottlenecks, junior people become exposed, contractors become defensive, consultants become guarded, clients become frustrated because the confidence they expected is not there, and everyone starts managing the consequence of a system that was too thin for the complexity it accepted. This is why capability is not abstract. It is experienced emotionally, as confidence, as space, as clarity, as trust, as the ability to say the difficult things early, as the feeling that the project is held by people and systems strong enough to deal with reality. When that is missing, you feel it, even if the report is green. At Bytnar, I think a lot about that feeling, because it is often more honest than the formal narrative. A project can have all the correct documents and still not feel properly understood. A team can be working hard and still not be aligned. A program can show progress and still be losing resilience. A governance structure can be impressive and still fail to protect judgment. Those are the environments where careful technical operational thinking matters, not to criticize from the outside, but to help the system see itself earlier, before pressure turns into failure, before defensiveness replaces learning, before everyone becomes too busy managing symptoms to address the structure. So did finance break construction? Yes, but quietly, and not alone. It broke construction by changing selection, by making some behaviors more valuable than others, by rewarding capital efficiency faster than capability renewal, by making risk movement look like risk management, by making management easier to justify than mastery, but treating slack as waste even when some of that slack was resilience, by allowing the industry to spend inherited strength without noticing that it was not being rebuilt at the same time and at the same rate. But it also helped construction. That has to be said. It enabled scale. It imposed discipline. It opened capital. It improved governance. It challenged complacency. It made some things better. That is why the story is not clean. And it should not be clean. The problem is not finance existing inside construction. The problem is finance becoming the primary lens through which everything else is judged. Because once that happens, anything that cannot justify itself financially in the short term becomes vulnerable. Things like training, mentorship, technical redundancy, coordination time, design maturity, professional judgment, contingency, all the things that prevent problems before they become measurable. And that is the central issue. Construction depends on many things that are most valuable before they become visible. That is why they get cut. And that is why cutting them eventually costs more. If there is one thing to take from this episode, it probably is this. The system did not fail because people stopped caring. It weakened because the things that made it strong became difficult to defend inside the dominant economic logic. That is different, and it matters, because if we misdiagnose the problem, we will keep prescribing the wrong solution. More pressure, more reporting, more contractual control, more productivity slogans, more technology layered onto fragmented systems, more demands on people already acting as the buffer. But if the real issue is capability erosion, then the answer is different. Rebuild technical authority, rebuild learning pipelines, rebuild coordination structures, rebuild trust between capital and delivery, rebuild the ability to tell the truth early, rebuild systems that reward long-term resilience, not just short-term optimization. That is not simple, but it is clearer, and clarity is a beginning. There is one last thought. And it was a long one, so one last thought and we're done. Construction was not broken in the sense that something smashed it from outside. It was redesigned, unintentionally, around different incentives. And systems do what they are designed to do, even when nobody designed them consciously. If the system rewards speed, it will produce speed. If it rewards risk transfer, it will produce risk transfer. If it rewards short-term return, it will produce short-term return. If it rewards visible control, it will produce visible control. But if we want construction to produce durable buildings, capable organizations, skilled people, reliable delivery, and assets that actually serve society, then we have to reward those things structurally, not just admire them after they're gone. Because fast growth and deep roots are not the same thing, and financially optimized industry can look impressive from above. The dashboards can glow green, the reports can sound controlled, the projects can keep moving, the margins can improve, and still, underneath, the roots can be thinning. You only really find out in the storm. And perhaps that is where construction is now. Not destroyed, not hopeless, but exposed. Exposed to the consequence of treating capability as overhead. Exposed to the limits of management without mastery. Exposed to the delayed cost of squeezing resilience out of delivery. Exposed to the gap between financial control and physical reality. No villain, no conspiracy, just selection. And selection can change, but only when we become honest about what the system is currently rewarding. So maybe the question is not simply, how did finance break construction? Maybe the better question is, what do we want construction to become valuable for again? Because what gets rewarded gets repeated, and what gets repeated becomes the industry. I will leave it there. No neat ending to this one. Just the reality of how these things tend to play out. If you are dealing with this day to day, you will know it is not straightforward. So thanks for listening. Hopefully it gave you something to take into your next conversation, your next project, or maybe just the next time something looks efficient on paper, but feels thinner in reality. I'm Piotr Bytnar, and this was Bytnar Talks. Until next time.